Hello, and welcome to this brand new episode of Women Between Worlds. And today's episode is all about neurodivergence through a very specific lens. It's going to be through, well, first of all, through my lens, and my lens as a midlife woman who has recently gone through a diagnosis myself for autism and ADHD off the back of my daughter, who's 21, my daughter's diagnosis, which began 4 years ago when she was just about to turn 18. So, my personal story is going to come into this, but really, what I want to get for this episode, or this episode, is really for you. If you are a neurodivergent woman, whether you are diagnosed, whether you are self-diagnosed, or if you are just curious, perhaps like many of the women that seem to come into my field over the years, you know you have neurodivergent children if you are a mother, but you haven't had a diagnosis yourself yet, but you've seen that through your family, through your children, and you've got to know about it. And specifically, if you are a business owner, if you are a founder, female founder, or any kind of independent work as a woman, this episode specifically is for you because what we're seeing right now, so it's 2026, and we are seeing huge shifts on the planet, huge shifts in the world. We know that systems are failing, there is a lot of change, things are very fast, things are very loud. We have AI, we have social media, we have technology. We're seeing there's a lot happening, right? There's a lot happening, and we're really feeling that. At the same time, we've also got this huge surge in women having diagnosis or recognizing neurodivergence in themselves. Like, this is a huge, huge shift. And there's loads of information out there about this, and there's loads of support growing out there for this. And I love that. However, today I want to look at things a little bit differently because today I'm really interested in, first of all, what is the purpose of neurodivergence? Like, why is it showing up? Why is it showing up in women? Why is it showing up in women who, many of who have certain types of careers or businesses? And how does that affect women specifically when they reach midlife, when they get to the end of their 30s, the beginning of their 40s? And what I believe some of the challenges and dangers are that we're facing right now because of this, as well as the opportunities. What could be the opportunities that are out there? So this is what we're going to get into today. So let's dive in. Really, what we're seeing right now is the first generation of women who were able to build large businesses, women who were able to hold public leadership roles, carry huge financial responsibilities, like not just the occasional woman, but many women. There's been a momentum of women stepping into power, rising in power, and with that, holding more responsibility, receiving more money. And this is the first generation where we've seen this. I'm 47 right now. And whilst my own mum had a career, she was a working mum. She went out and got a degree part-time. While she was working, she went to university. I think she was in her 30s or 40s, maybe in her 40s, and decided to go to university for the first time in her life and get a degree. And she worked, and she was one of the path breakers in leading that change, right? For women who grew up in the 60s and 70s, many of these women it was the first time women had stepped into careers. So now we've seen this huge surge of women stepping into innovation, mentorship, founders, creators, women doing all these incredible things. It's not surprising that large numbers of these women have begun to understand that they are neurodivergent, right? Because they did some studies on this on men. Of course, the studies on men usually began first, and then on women it's later. So we've got this happening right now. We've got this rise of women in power and leadership. We've also got the rise, or really the infancy of understanding women, women's bodies, women's health, and how things are working for women, right? But it was widely known and accepted that around 50% of the men in Silicon Valley, so when Silicon Valley was rising, we were seeing innovation, technology, IT, the kind of technology world. When the technology world was initially rising, and it was mostly men, it was a really male dominated industry. It was widely accepted that around 50% of those men were known to be neurodivergent. And that was just a fact. That was just a reality. That type of career, that type of industry where it was all about innovation, it was about doing new things, it was about creating new realities almost, right? With AI, with technology, it's new pathways, new realities. That was very heavily there was a very large percentage, half of all of the men that worked in that area were neurodivergent, were known to be neurodivergent. So that was just a thing that no one's really talking about. Then when we look at the general population, so general population wise, we think around 10 to 20% of people are neurodivergent. And today, whilst I'm using the word neurodivergent, I want to clarify that I'm talking specifically and mostly around ADHD and autism. So we know neurodivergence includes a number of different neurotypes and different ways that people may be affected. But for the sake of conversation today, this is about women who do not have any intellectual Ah, I should have had the right word written down and prepared for this because I don't want to get the word wrong. They don't have any impairment, right? They don't have any intellectual impairments. We're talking about women who, I'm not saying that there isn't some challenges there or even disability for many people, but women who have intellectual capabilities, right? They don't have any impairment on that side. And mainly we were talking about ADHD and autism. So about 10 to 20% roughly of the population may be neurodivergent. And this has always been the case, right? This isn't something new. So what we know from an evolutionary point of view is that humans evolved to have diversity. Humans evolved to have different types of brains and different types of bodies. And we're going to get onto the body and how the body of neurodivergent people and neurodivergent women specifically varies and what you need to know about neurodivergent bodies if you're a woman. But we understand that as a species, having different minds, different variations was not a dysfunction. It was actually serving the species, right? Serving the community. So typically the what we would call neurodivergent people now were the people who had enhanced sensory awareness. They were the people that could they could see things that others couldn't see. They could have very tuned in to sound. Their nervous systems were wired in a way that made them sense and feel things that the other 80 to 90% of people couldn't feel. So this was a useful variant in nervous systems, bodies, brains to have for humanity. So without going into a whole episode on the anthropology and the history and like what is neurodivergence, I'm going to assume that if you're listening to this, like you know a lot of that stuff. What can it tell us today? This is a question that I've been sitting with. What can it tell us today that large numbers of women, and many of them being women who are in positions of power or rising into power, rising into leadership roles, already in leadership roles, high percentage of women being neurodivergent, how could that serve us? Rather than looking at this as a dysfunction, as a disorder, as something that's going wrong and pathologizing and really getting focused on all of those details of all the ways it shows up. And that's not to say that women aren't suffering because of this and we don't need solutions to it, right? But there are other conversations around that. But what could be the possible advantage? What could be the reason that it's happening? So we already know that as humans, we have evolved to have variations and that variation is useful. We know that in certain industries, in history, in certain industries, we have understood and accepted that there will be certain neurotypes that thrive in those industries. So that brings us to where we are right now, which is women who are leaders, innovators, creators, in often mentors, coaches, healers, all these different things are making up a large proportion of these numbers of this traditionally 10 to 20% of the population, and now making up a large number of the women getting diagnosed as neurodivergent. So, what could be the purpose of that? Like, what could be the benefit of that? Like, so to me, this is obvious. My pattern matching, part of my neurodivergence, seeing patterns, seeing the future, seeing where things are going, seeing how things are connected, connecting the dots, is that neurodivergent people have always been highly sensitive and have been able to, in some ways, I call it the canary in the coal mines. Yeah, so the canary in the coal mine is where you see what's not working. So you know what a canary in a coal mine is, right? So the canaries were so sensitive, they would take them down the coal mine, and then, if they died, that would be a sign of the toxicity. So neurodivergent people, I believe, right now are signposting where we are out of alignment as a society, as a species. So this is why neurodivergent people are suffering, are having some of the biggest challenges. This is where neurodivergence shows up in schools, in our schooling system, and different ways of learning have been challenged because of that percentage of people that are a different neurotype that have this variation are not are not suited to that system and not suited to the school system. So often neurodivergent women will end up as self-employed, running their own businesses, and that can even mask knowing that you're neurodivergent in the beginning, because some of the clues, some of the ways that people can often discover their neurodivergence is through, their daily life, how they show up at work, how they show up in their relationships, what's happening in their health and their body. So if you run your own business, I will tell my story a little bit in a minute, but if you run your own business, I've been running my own business since my early 20s, like from almost all of my life, I've run my own business. It can really mask that this could be, a disorder because of the sense of freedom, autonomy, the control I have over my environment. I don't have to be around other people. If I don't want to be around other people, I can control the sound, my own comfort, the smells, like many things that I will struggle with in other places. Especially in a lot of, I don't like going to, there's many events I can't go to, especially if they're in hotels with really bright lights, or meeting rooms, like traditional boardrooms, all of the things when I was in corporate that I found really offensive, like really hard to deal with, even as my 20-year-old self. Like my 47-year-old self has no tolerance at all. We'll get on to a little bit about the midlife point as well. So when you work for yourself, and even if you haven't always worked for yourself, it can often mask a lot of the neurodivergence because we have that freedom. And that's a good thing. So I think let's log some of the benefits and the good things from we have a variation in human brain type, body type that is at its core a positive thing. Yeah, variation is positive in terms of evolution. We have high sensitivity, we have a high sense of pattern recognition, creativity, innovation, doing things differently. The path breakers, the misfits, the weirdos, right? These are often the neurodivergent people. And, as an 80s kid, I was born in 1979. So as an 80s kid, there was just a lot of, you were quirky, you were a bit weird, you were a bit different. So there's been a lot of pathologizing neurodivergence over the last few years. And we need to be really careful about that, because we're going to lose focus on why this is happening and how this can be advantageous, as well as looking at some of the challenges that need addressing in the long term. So I mentioned about the canary in the coal mine. So one of the theories that I hold around neurodivergence and this the rise, or the seeming rise, and at least the rise in recognition, the rise in diagnosis, is that the neurodivergent people are really highlighting where society has gone so far wrong, where we're so outside of our natural environment. Now we can see this shows up in the body, in the body specifically of neurodivergent people. We can see how some of this is working on a biological level, and it gives us some clues about what possibly is happening here and what we can do about it. So neurodivergent bodies, and this is very emerging research. So there is data out there on this, but it's still new. I think the very first studies on women with ADHD started around 2018. So this is very new, and they were looking at women and their menstrual cycles and the connection between ADHD and PMDD and these other kind of cofactors that can often go with having a neurodivergent neurotype brain and a neurodivergent body, because it's not just a brain, like the brain is behaving a certain way. This is a whole body experience. Being neurodivergent, you're in a neurodivergent body, right? We'll get onto that a little bit more in a minute. So this is emerging data, this is emerging science. So some of the science that has been really interesting to me has been between the connection of iron dysfunction. So iron dysfunction being a bit of a health nut and having a long history of chronic illness, autoimmune. I was diagnosed with endometriosis when I was just 12 years old. I was actually the youngest person, the youngest woman, of course, to be diagnosed with endometriosis at that time. And I was contacted by the world expert, a guy called Chris Sutton. He was really interested in looking, because at that time they believed that endometriosis was something that developed in a woman over time as she had her cycles, as she bled, as she went through these months. And mine was quite near the beginning. I'd been bleeding a year, 2 years. And so this was the beginning of understanding that endometriosis wasn't a result of a woman having her cycles, but was actually something more foundational. It was about the immune system. It was actually a metabolic and an immune issue, and the things that we're beginning to understand about endometriosis now. So I have had a very deep interest in chronic illness, in autoimmune, and a whole host of experiences I've had in my life, from my body rejecting breast implants I had put in, having breast implants removed and healing from that, along with loads of, yeah, I could give you a long list. Iron dysregulation is something that I got really interested in going back almost 10 years after I had my second child. So I've always had low hemoglobin. I've always had very low ferritin, very low as in down to 5. So anything under 50 is considered less than ideal, and mine would average around about 12 to 13. And then if I'd had lots of heavy bleeds, or like after I had my son, it was down to 5 and hadn't really recovered. So I did a deep dive into iron, and very recent data is emerging around the link between iron and ADHD. So the reason why, and you might be, if you don't know any of this, you might be thinking like, what does iron got to do with ADHD? So iron is part of your dopamine production. It's a mineral that's required in order for your body to create dopamine. And so when iron is low, or specifically when ferritin levels, your iron storage levels are low, we can see a certain pattern of physiology and of behavior that looks like ADHD. So this will be low motivation. This will be wired, like a kind of wired energy. Even when you're tired, it could be like, I'm wired, I've got this kind of buzzy energy. Or the inability to follow through, like the impulse to start something but a difficulty in finishing, and many other things. Obviously there's some, like, you might have dizziness, which, dizziness on standing, and other things. There's also cofactors like POTS and other things we know that go along with neurodivergence. So in this emerging research, we're beginning to see how this is much more than just a brain type or a neurotype, but this is a full body experience. Around 75% of women who have ADHD or who are ADHD, you don't have it, but you are ADHD, is like is your umbrella of symptoms and experiences that you're having. Around 75% of women with ADHD are also hypermobile. So hypermobile, if your elbow bends backwards. I used to think this was really normal. It's like, don't other people's bodies bend in this way? If your thumb goes back, when I was a kid, it used to go all the way, so I had to bend my wrist all the way around to the back. Maybe your standing, your hip stability, your knees, hypermobility in women with neurodivergence is huge. Like the grand majority, 75% of women with ADHD, I'm not sure what the percentage is on autism, but it's up there with the majority of neurodivergent women have um, hypermobile bodies. Now, why is that? So that's something to do with our collagen. That's something to do again with the very structures of the body. So when we look at the structures of the body, we look at minerals, we're looking at amino acids, we're looking at proteins, all of these parts that lived in the realm before, maybe of nutrition or fitness and wellness. So the work that I did around iron was all about iron recycling, iron function. You can take iron tablets, wouldn't recommend it, but can your body use that iron? Is it able to absorb it? Is it able to get it into the parts of the body where it's needed? Or is it stashing it away in places that's becoming toxic? Do you have large amounts of many women that feel like they have low iron, that have the symptoms of low iron, just actually have poor iron recycling. So the more iron you put into your body, the more it's just being like taken to the places and stored away, and the more toxicity and the more problems that is causing. Iron toxicity is oxidization, inflammation. Yeah. So, on the biology side, neurodivergent brains are also neurodivergent bodies, and there can be big variations with those that seem to be related in clusters to certain ways of being, like hypermobility and iron dysfunction. So this also brings us to the question of, could the basis of the neurodivergence be some of these biological factors where the needs of the body are not being met due to the environment that we're in? So, are we iron, for example, iron regulation, having a solid iron system in your body is very dependent on circadian rhythm. It's very dependent on sunlight. There needs to be sunlight entering the retina, entering the eyeballs every day in order for your body to do what it needs to do with iron and therefore with dopamine. And it's not enough to just look through a window, because when you look through a glass window, your body doesn't get the same message that it gets when you're outside, even if it's cloudy. So being outside, what has been the impact of us looking at screens? What has been the impact? Like, what has changed in the last 20 odd years is that we're all looking at screens every day. 20 years ago, we did have laptops and we had some little brick phones, but we weren't looking at screens most days. And not some people, maybe in some jobs, were looking at a PC, right? But most of us weren't looking at screens every day. And if we were, at the end of the workday, that would be it. But now entrepreneurial women are probably looking at their screen early in the morning, spending a lot of time at their laptops, even though they've got this freedom, this flexibility, all the things that were like really appealing to the neurodivergent. But we can end up very sucked in. We can end up still looking at our screens the majority of the day. So where we are seeing, so I mentioned the canary in the coal mine. right? This, you already have a sensitive system. So the neurodivergent body is sensitive. It's got heightened reactions, heightened awareness, and this historically would have been a really positive thing. And what that's doing right now is it's highlighting where are we as a species out of alignment with the way that we're meant to live, to the point that it's just that it's breaking us down, it's burning us out, it's causing us mental health challenges, it's causing us physical challenges, illnesses, chronic illnesses, diseases, so many things that fall under the umbrella of autoimmune, chronic illness, and even something like, as speaking from experience with my endometriosis and fibromyalgia and all these other things, that neurodivergent people are so much more likely to suffer from. What if that is a symptom of these exquisitely sensitive bodies that have evolved to be that way, that are showing us where the breaks in the dam are before it's affecting as much? I'm not saying these things don't affect people who are neurotypical, right? Of course, like neurotypical people are also affected by these things. They also need their circadian rhythm, and they also need their minerals, and they also need, but the neurodivergent body is showing us that in the masses. It's showing us with our, the breakdown of our joints and our collagen and the hypermobility. It's showing us with the iron dysregulation and the lack of dopamine in the system. So, where does this leave us right now with where we're at? And why is it showing up so much harder in midlife? So this is an easy one to answer, because in midlife we've got hormone shifts, and we have changes in estrogen, progesterone. All of the different hormones are shifting in midlife, and they're meant to shift. They're not meant to be corrected. They're meant to change. They're meant to adjust as we go through this transition. So as this is happening, we often see the sensitivity of the body getting even higher. So in neurodivergent women that have spent years masking, they have, even if you see from a biological lens, when you get to midlife, you're more likely to be depleted in your minerals. The food that we're eating today is less and less mineral rich. So we've got a supply chain issue, a lot of supply chain, but we've got a systemic food issue. So that's driving one of the things. We've also got lifestyle issue of not getting out in the sunlight, not drinking enough water, not having the nutrients that we need in all the form, the sunlight as a nutrient as well as in the food. And then we have midlife, where we've got a shift in hormones and a transition that we're going through, much like puberty. So this becomes like a perfect storm where all of these issues are coming up to be seen at the same time. And so my journey has been, I have been running my business, running different businesses. I've had about 6, maybe 7 businesses over the years for about 20 years. And over the last 2, so since I hit about 44, 45, I had a pregnancy, which resulted in a loss when I was about 3 months pregnant. After the pregnancy, my hormones have been through quite a shift. And I've been navigating that. I've been really interested in that. And what I've noticed is that a lot of my neurodivergent traits that were either easier to mask before, or just weren't much of a problem in day-to-day life. Like I saw them more as like, just, yeah, I have these cool creativity, the different ways that my brain works and the way I see things. I never felt that it held me back or that it was a problem. I have a different perspective on that now, especially since I've been going through my diagnosis. And something I want to say about, if you are questioning having a diagnosis, if you haven't been diagnosed yet, it is fair to diagnose yourself. If you have if you have researched and you have identified with a lot of the neurodivergent traits, it is valid to self-diagnose. However, a external diagnosis for me has been a process that is way beyond the kind of understanding I could have of myself from the inside. So having a diagnostic process, I don't care about the label, and the label is not my identity. And I think this is an issue, right? Many people get diagnosed, and then the diagnosis becomes the identity of who I am, and then it becomes often, let's be honest, a source of victimhood as well. And it can really feed that victim consciousness. That's not to say that there aren't challenges. That's not to say that there aren't real issues that need addressing, but it can feed that consciousness that we are as a species. We've very much been there for a long time, right? So it's also highlighting that as another canary in the coal mine moment where it's also highlighting that. But having a diagnosis has been, or going through the process of diagnosis in of itself has been really enlightening to me. It's enabled me to look at all the different, and of course, in a diagnosis, they're not looking at your biology. They haven't asked me any questions about my body. So the body side of things, the health side of things, the minerals and the movement, the mobility, that's all my own research. But in terms of their official diagnostic criteria, it's been really enlightening understanding what are the particular, like, what is my particular flavor of neurodivergence? How is that showing up for me? And where are the areas where I might need more support? Where are my blind spots? What are the areas where my desire to do things differently and to be impulsive and push forwards, like where has that hurt me in the past? Because if I haven't had the mentorship or the awareness of that, we haven't seen all these layers in society of, look, do you have this neurotype? This is how life is going to be for you. This is how life is going to be for you, or how life may be for you, right? Going through the schooling system, this is what work life might be like. This is what relationships might be like for you. So I love that we have all of this awareness. It's beautiful, it's needed, and it's changing things. And one of the parts that I really believe in about going for a diagnosis, if you haven't so far, is that also is adding to the understanding that this is a collective issue and there's something happening in the collective that needs to be addressed. If everyone sits at home reading and researching, and as we love to do as neurodivergent people, and nodding along with things, but they don't get diagnosed, we're also missing that push that we do need in research to understand what's really happening, especially when it comes to our biology. So, what's happening in neurodivergent bodies when women go through menopause? What's happening in neurodivergent bodies when women are pregnant, right? So, neurodivergent bodies are more sensitive and more demanding. They are really metabolically expensive to run. This is something that's really key to understand, is that by our design, because of the society that we live in, that most of us live in, like, I don't know where you're tuning in for, but let's say, most westernized societies, we're not growing our own food, we're not working outdoors, we're not really we're not in community where we have different people with different roles. We're often on our own. Even if we're connected to people online, we're often on our own. We're often on our own running businesses. We're often on our own raising children. And we're on our own buying and cooking our food. Like, we may live with a partner. Many people don't, but we may live with a partner. But it's so these simple things, these foundational pieces of what am I eating every day can become huge areas of resistance and issues and problems for all of people, and especially neurodivergent women. How many times have you felt that, what's for dinner? It sounds like a joke, but it's really fucking not. Like, it's really not. The struggle is real. I put out a post a while ago on Instagram about being fed And so many women were commenting and messaged me from that one post saying, yes, that's exactly how I feel. Like this, we are no longer being looked after. So how do I imagine this would have looked in the past? So, in the past, we would have had the neurodivergent people with their heightened sensitivity, with their super tuned in nervous systems, would be doing their roles, whatever they would be, and depending on where you are in the world and how far back you want to go. But let's say one of your roles was as a seer, was as a mystic for the tribe, because you could see what other people couldn't see, you could feel what other people couldn't feel. And there's many neurodivergent women who have been founding businesses, stepping into leadership, that also have these skills, that have, that are understanding, they're tuning into their psychic skills, there's the seer in them, the mystic in them, right? So in the past, the medicine woman, the mystic, the seer, she would have had her role and she would have been taken care of by the tribe. There'd be certain things she wouldn't have to be thinking about, like what's for dinner. That's not to say that medicine women never cooked. In fact, historically, women were often involved in roles like grinding down the grains into flour, because that was seen as a very spiritual process. It would be a meditation. It would take you into a trance, right? And so, a lot of spirituality, a lot of ritual comes from, and a lot of where we are now with like women's places in the kitchen and other things that kind of got a little bit too far, began rooted in a space where the medicine women did these things because there was a certain amount of ritual, ceremony, and trance, and also the energetics of how we prepare food. So the world that we're living in right now does mostly not look like that. Most women, even if they have a partner, so some women might have fantastic partners that love to cook and look after them. Some women may even, I do love to cook. I love food, I love eating, I love health, I love fresh ingredients. But then we might not feel like we have the capacity to do it because our bodies, our nervous system, our brains are already on another level, right? So we also, I mentioned iron, I mentioned minerals. There's also a sensitivity to blood sugar, to caffeine. And sometimes these physical, biological issues can look like a willpower problem, like a mind problem. Like this is just something that you need to try harder or overcome. But this is real biology. This is rooted in our cells, in our bodies. And so, if this is showing up in our individual bodies, and then we're seeing it's not just one woman or 10 women, this is a collective, this is, 10 to 20% of the population are neurodivergent, so possibly it could be even more, where we're seeing this collective, the result of collective living, the result of our lifestyle, the result of a system that puts us through schooling, that pushes us to produce, to then go on to, to make money, to run businesses, to do all these things. And women have stepped into these roles and have been extremely successful. And then we add a layer of neurodivergence, so you've got maybe if it's anything like Silicon Valley, maybe it could be 50% of women who are female founders have some kind of neurodivergence, are in some way have a neurotype that is a variation from the norm. So let's say as an educated guess that 50% of women in positions of power, positions of leadership and innovation are neurodivergent. We don't know. This is the first generation of women to be going through this. We don't know what will happen when they do get to midlife, when even if they've seen this, you can see this way before midlife. You can have dysregulation, you can have immune issues, you can have metabolic issues, you can have illness, you can have all these things way before your 40s. But when these women get to midlife, when the body is naturally more depleted, especially if you've had children and you haven't been, you haven't been restoring your foundations and really anchoring in this way of living that's cyclical, that's honoring nature, that's working with light, that's working with nutrients, that's working with movements, fluids, water, hydration, all of these things that feel so much, right? So overwhelming. If we haven't been doing those things and we get to midlife, that's when we are going to really feel it if we haven't before. So I believe this is where we are now. So this is where we are now in 2026. We are seeing huge numbers of women who have been leading, path breaking, rising in power into leadership, doing all these amazing things. Many of those women are really struggling as they move into their 40s. And if you're listening to this and you're one of those women, my hope for you from this episode today is that you begin to see another side to this that isn't about a disorder, that isn't about challenges, although they are there, and begins to see a bigger picture of the system, the very systems that we're operating within are not supportive of these innovators, and we need these innovators to be able to move forward with the world that we are building, with where we're going. So it's one thing to be helping young women rise, but we also need to be helping mature neurodivergent women stay, because we need these neurodivergent mature women to move into eldership and not to burn out and disappear from the space of leading, innovating, and creating, right? So this is what I have been seeing in the space. This is a really tough time. If you are a middle-aged neurodivergent woman who works for herself or runs her own business and you are struggling, then I can relate and I see you. There are ways for us to move through this outside of medication. And that's including, I'm a big fan of microdosing. I've done other episodes. You can go listen to other episodes about psilocybin, either in big doses or microdosing psilocybin. And so many of my clients have absolutely loved microdosing for the way that it's helped them navigate their neurodivergence. But it also can become, if we use medicines in the way that we use allopathic medicine, where it's like there is a problem and I need to fix it. This is not the way those medicines want to be used. It's not a case of popping a pill every day, or instead of a medication, a stimulant that, from my doctor, I'll use an alternative therapy like microdosing or even functional mushrooms, and the many different ways that people are experimenting. And some of them are really great, right? But also that system in of itself is one of the systems that is not working and is collapsing and needs to change. So there needs to be a mindset shift around as well. How are we perceiving, even with alternative therapies and microdosing, how are we seeing these things as a way to kind of fix something that doesn't need fixing? What if what needed addressing, or if something needed fixing was that the systems that we're operating within have had their time? And I know it sucks to be living through these times where if you are a canary in the coal mine, if that is your body screaming out saying, I can't live like this, I can't live in a box with artificial lights and screens all the time, or the smells of the fake smells of artificial perfumes and all these many things that can be really, really, from personal experience, really, really bothersome, especially in my 40s, my mid 40s. It's my tolerance for anything like that is just, it's just gone. I can't tolerate anything like that. So I understand it really sucks at times to be the one whose body is beaming out, like beacons, like our bodies are beaming out like beacons to say, warning, these are the warning lights, warning, warning, we're on the wrong path. We're on the wrong path as a society. The way that we're schooling, the way that we're eating, the way that we're living, the way that we're moving or not moving our bodies. And neurodivergent bodies are sensitive, and that's beautiful. And just like our brains tend to identify unusual patterns, our bodies are also, I believe, highlighting less understood patterns around metabolism, around, minerals, around collagen and joints. And so this is exciting times because things are moving quickly. What can you do right now? I'm going to wrap this up. We've been here a while, and I know I've jumped around a lot. I did have some ideas of what I wanted to talk about, and I said I'd tell my story, and I actually didn't really. So I may come back and do another one that is just my story. But I hope that there has been something here for you that has helped you see something in a new way or feel differently about what is happening as a neurodivergent woman and the things that you can do. So the most foundational pieces are what's really worked for me, and as a mother as well of a autistic and ADHD daughter, she's 21 now, is that we cannot bypass the very basic foundational needs of the body. The neurodivergent body needs more than anyone the rhythm and the nourishment and the nutrients that we were designed to have, that we were born to have, right? The sunlight, getting out in the morning. If I can't get outside in the morning, I open my window, even if it's cold. So I'll put on something really warm and just sit by my windowsill with the window open and just let the light come into my eyes. And that's how I begin my day. I don't look at a screen. So taking care of where you are being nourished, being cyclical, being in rhythm, um, spending less time on your screens. I know it's can be really addictive, and that will be another episode as well. We're going to be talking about habits and things and how we can implement, how we can make changes and transform, because transformation and change for neurodivergent women is, in my experience, quite different, even though the majority of my clients are neurodivergent. So I just thought it was normal because that's what I've been working with for decades. But that's not how the majority of us do change. So I've had so much benefit from having neurodivergent mentors, people that really get it, and also working with people that are a different neurotype to me. I think that is also really underrated. There was a period of time where I thought, oh, I just those neurotypical mentors, coaches, people that I've worked with, just they don't understand me, they don't get it, and they have a completely different energy signature and they have a different way of seeing things. And but there's things that we can learn there because this is about an ecosystem, right? This is about understanding each other, and this is about coming together as a community and seeing the beauty in how that synchronizes as a whole. So the neurodivergent brains are needed, and the neurotypical, that it's all divergence. It's all different types of seeing the world are needed. But in the meantime, what we really need to do right now is anchor in our foundational pieces. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Absolute priority: sleep, hydration, sunlight, minerals, proteins. Not loads of proteins. You don't need loads of proteins. And if you have any digestion issues, if you have any bloating, IBS, any inflammation, you're probably not going to be able to digest loads of protein. So also a lot of this generic advice, like how much protein you're meant to eat, especially into midlife, is, that's not going to work for everyone. That's not going to be appropriate for most people I work with. We're going to be dialing that stuff back, going to be dialing it back and just going for the real foundational pieces, your fiber, your minerals, your hydration. Yeah. So really understanding ourselves, understanding our bodies, and really knowing what we need. And that is the most beautiful thing right now, amongst all the noise, amongst all of the chaos, is that we're discovering new things. This is emergent. This is new. And I began this episode talking about, we are the first generation of women building businesses, holding public leadership roles, and carrying financial responsibility, who are moving into midlife. Like, we will be the first elders in our communities who have these decades and decades of knowledge. So it's so important that neurodivergent women can stay and that they don't burn out and that they don't succumb to illnesses and parts of being a sensitive woman that can really bring you down and really burn you out. And so we need to begin to understand each other and then work on systems and communities and ways of supporting so that we can really thrive, because it is possible to do that. And that is, I believe, how life is meant to be for whether you're a neurodivergent woman or whoever you are. We're here to thrive, right? So let's close this down. I would love to hear from you if you experienced any shifts or if something stood out to you. If you want to carry on this conversation, reply, drop me a message. I always love to hear how this landed for you. And just remember, our core message of today is really around neurodivergence, not just being about challenges, not being a disorder, but really revealing where systems no longer work. And that's amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today. Sending lots of love. I'll see you on the next episode.